Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, 1929, is one of the most powerful anti-war novels in world literature. Based on Remarque's own experiences as a German soldier during World War I, the novel explores the brutal reality of trench warfare and the devastating psychological impact it has on the young soldiers who fight it. Told from the perspective of Paul Baumer, a 19-year-old German infantryman, the novel shatters the romanticized myth of war as glorious or noble. Rather than depicting epic battles or heroic feats, Remarque focuses on the banality, trauma, and disintegration of the individual in war. Through Paul's eyes, we witness the death of youth, the breakdown of ideals, and the enduring scars of violence. With its raw and unflinching prose, All Quiet on the Western Front not only critiques the institutions that promote war but also offers a heartbreaking meditation on the loss of innocence, identity, and humanity. Banned and burned by the Nazis for its pacifist message, the novel remains a classic of anti-war literature, speaking to generations about the human cost of conflict. Chapter 1-3. Introduction to the Front. The novel opens in the German trenches on the Western Front during World War I. Paul Baumer, the narrator, is a 19-year-old soldier who enlisted straight out of school along with his classmates under the influence of patriotic teacher Erich, who glorified military service. Now hardened by combat, Paul and his friends, Albert Kropp, Müller, Lear, and Jaden, spend their days surviving the horrors of trench warfare. They have just returned from the front for a brief rest and are eating double rations because so many of their comrades have died. The contrast between their present cynicism and their youthful idealism is stark. They now realize that their training, especially under the cruel Himmelstas, was senseless brutality, and their education has not prepared them for the reality of war. Paul reflects on the camaraderie among soldiers, the bond forged in suffering, and how the war has erased their past identities and disconnected them from civilian life. Chapter 4-6. Life and Death in the Trenches. The middle chapters portray the relentless violence and chaos of battle. Paul and his unit are constantly exposed to shellfire, gas attacks, and the gruesome deaths of comrades. He describes the dehumanizing effects of war, the lice, the rats, the filth, the constant hunger, and the sound of wounded men screaming in no man's land. A notable episode occurs when Paul and others volunteered to guard a supply depot and enjoy rare luxuries like decent food and relative peace. Later, in the trenches, Paul experiences profound fear and desperation. One harrowing scene involves Paul killing a French soldier in a shell crater. Trapped with the dying man for hours, Paul undergoes a moral crisis, overwhelmed by guilt and empathy. This becomes a turning point. He realizes that the enemy is not a monster, but a man like himself, and that the true enemy is the system that sends men to kill each other. Chapter 7-8. Leave and Disillusionment. Paul is granted leave to return home, but instead of solace, he finds alienation and emotional numbness. His father and others ask about war as if it were a noble adventure, and Paul cannot express the trauma he has endured. His mother is gravely ill, and he feels like a stranger in his own home. His visit to the military hospital further shows the devastating physical and mental toll of war. Paul's generation, he realizes, has been destroyed by war before they could even begin adult life. Even if they survive, they will never be whole again. Chapter 9-10. The Return to the Front. Back at the front, Paul is increasingly desensitized. He and his friends engage in small pleasures, cooking stolen pigs, joking, but death looms constantly. One by one, his friends die. Müller is shot. Lear bleeds to death, and Kaczynski, Kat, Paul's closest friend and mentor, is killed by shrapnel while Paul carries him on his back. Kat's death leaves Paul utterly broken. Their bond represented the last vestige of human connection and sanity in the madness of war. Now, Paul is left alone. Chapter 11-12. The end of the war. The novel's final chapters depict the utter futility and hopelessness of the conflict. Paul's thoughts are weary and fatalistic. He is the last of his school friends still alive. He muses that the best he can hope for is an empty, shattered life after the war ends. In the final pages, the narrative shifts to a third-person perspective. Paul is killed in October 1918, just weeks before the armistice. The report on the day of his death states that the front was all quiet, and that there was nothing significant to report, underscoring the complete insignificance of individual lives in the machinery of war. Character analysis. Paul Baumer. Paul is both the novel's narrator and emotional core. Intelligent and sensitive, Paul is a poet at heart who becomes a disillusioned soldier. His transformation from idealistic youth to traumatized veteran reflects the central arc of the novel. Paul's inner monologues are filled with existential questioning, guilt, and philosophical reflection. His love for literature, his compassion for comrades, and his guilt over killing show that he retains fragments of his humanity. However, as the war drags on, Paul becomes numb and fatalistic, seeing death as the only escape. His final death is not a moment of heroism but of eerie calm and silence, reinforcing the anti-war message. Kaczynski, Kat. Kat is the unofficial leader of the group, a shrewd, resourceful older soldier with a knack for finding food and supplies. He is pragmatic and fatherly, and his bond with Paul is central to the novel's emotional weight. Kat represents common sense, decency, and survival, and his death shatters Paul's remaining hope. His importance lies in how he humanizes the experience of war through acts of care and loyalty. Albert Kropp. Kropp is the most analytical of the group. He frequently critiques the war's logic and hierarchy, suggesting that leaders should personally fight out their disputes. He represents intellectual resistance to the system and remains thoughtful even in suffering. He loses a leg and becomes deeply depressed. Muller. Muller is practical and focused on tangible needs. He dreams of passing his school exams and often speculates about post-war life. His death, and the transfer of his boots to another soldier, underscores the inhuman economy of war, where possessions outlast people. Jaden. Jaden is a comic figure, a former locksmith with a big appetite and a grudge against Himmelstoss. His character offers moments of levity but also shows how working-class soldiers adapt to survive in brutal conditions. Kantorek. Kantorek, the schoolteacher who urges Paul and his classmates to enlist, is a symbol of misguided nationalism and generational betrayal. He represents the intellectual class that glorified war without understanding its consequences. His hypocrisy is exposed when he is later conscripted and humiliated. Himmelstoss. A petty tyrant during training, Himmelstoss is a figure of military absurdity. Once in combat, he tries to act heroically but is revealed as a coward. He represents the arbitrary and dehumanizing nature of military hierarchy. Major themes. 1. The futility and horror of war. All Quiet on the Western Front is a devastating indictment of war. It portrays battle not as heroic, but as pointless slaughter. Soldiers die randomly, often in grotesque ways. The war achieves nothing of value and leaves survivors psychologically ruined. Remarque emphasizes the mechanized brutality of modern warfare, artillery, gas, machine guns, all of which reduce human life to expendable matter. The novel critiques not just specific tactics or battles, but the very institution of war. 2. The Lost Generation. Paul and his classmates are part of what became known as the Lost Generation, young men whose lives and futures were obliterated by World War I. They entered the army full of patriotic fervor and were quickly disillusioned. Paul states that the war has made them older than their years and severed their ties to civilian life. They can never return to the world they left behind because they are no longer whole. 3. Dehumanization and alienation. War strips soldiers of their individuality. They become numbers, bodies, gear. The constant exposure to death and suffering leads to emotional numbness. Paul often reflects on how he and his comrades have lost the capacity for normal feeling. This dehumanization is reinforced by the military machine, a system that cares more about discipline, efficiency, and obedience than about the lives of its soldiers. 4. The betrayal of youth. Remarque attacks the education system and older generation, represented by Erich, for persuading naive boys to sacrifice themselves for nationalistic ideals. These adults do not fight, yet they speak of honor and duty. The young soldiers quickly realize that they were lied to, and that their trust was exploited. The war becomes a betrayal not only by the enemy but by their own country and culture. 5. Comradeship as redemption. Amid the horror, one source of meaning remains: the bond between soldiers. Paul's relationship with Kat and his comrades provides fleeting moments of joy, solidarity, and humanity. Comradeship becomes a form of resistance to dehumanization. It is not romanticized, but it is the only thing that gives the soldiers strength to continue. 6. Nature and indifference. Nature appears frequently in the novel, not as a healing force, but as a detached observer. The beauty of trees, skies, and animals contrasts sharply with the violence of war. Nature continues its cycles, indifferent to human suffering. This juxtaposition underscores the cosmic indifference of the universe and adds to the novel's existential tone. Literary style and structure. 1. First-person narration. Paul's first-person narration allows readers to experience the war's horrors intimately. His voice is honest, reflective, and emotionally restrained. This detached tone makes the violence even more chilling. 2. Realism and imagery. Remarque's descriptions are gritty, precise, and physical. He focuses on bodily suffering, the smell of wounds, the feel of mud, the noise of bombardment. This realism brings the reader into the trenches and conveys the sensory overload of battle. 3. Symbolism. Boots are a recurring symbol, passed from one dead soldier to another, representing the disposability of life and the continuity of death. Animals, such as horses screaming during shelling, evoke a primal horror that transcends language. Silence and quiet are used ironically, most notably in the title. All quiet means nothing happened, even as Paul dies, underscoring the indifference of official reports to human life. 4. Cyclical structure. The novel's events repeat: marches, shelling, deaths, suggesting that war is a meaningless cycle. There is no progression, only survival or death. Even Paul's death is anticlimactic, reinforcing the theme of absurdity. Conclusion. Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front remains one of the most devastating portrayals of war ever written. Through Paul Baumer's eyes, we experience the collapse of ideals, the erosion of identity, and the shattering of youth under the relentless grind of mechanized combat. The novel's enduring power lies in its honesty and humanity. It neither glorifies nor sentimentalizes war. Instead, it speaks plainly of pain, friendship, fear, and futility. Paul's voice, quiet but unflinching, echoes across generations as a reminder of the cost of conflict. Not in numbers or victories, but in souls lost and dreams destroyed. In an age still marked by war, All Quiet on the Western Front remains a necessary and haunting testament to the truth that war is not an adventure, but a wound that never fully heals.